So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending CDA's Round 2 for the Bridge to Recovery Grant Program webinar. CDA is very pleased and excited that we could offer Round 2 funding. My name is Roxanne McAlpine, and I'm the Project Manager for the Bridge to Recovery Grant Program here at CDA. Joining me today to present the parameters for Round 2 funding will be Chantel Bush. She's CDA's Branch Chief over our Health at Home branch. And in addition, Brittany Trujillo with Public Consulting Group, who is our fiscal intermediary partner for this project. And Brittany will be joining us to discuss how to apply using the Grants Connect system. PCG assisted us in Round 1, and they will also be assisting us throughout Round 2. We have many other leadership members from CDA and PCG to help answer questions as well. And we have much to cover today, so I have a few housekeeping issues to go over. Next slide, Peter. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation, but if time permits, we would like to answer questions during the presentation, but only if time permits. Please raise your hand if you have a question. You will have the option to unmute after we call on you. You can also add your questions to the Q&A section and we'll read it out loud. You will be on mute throughout the program, but again, please raise your hand or post your question in the chat. All questions asked will be saved and used for the development of future support material. As mentioned, partnering with us is Public Consulting Group. PCG is a public sector consulting firm that works with health, education, and human service agencies. The California Department of Aging has contracted with PCG to provide fiscal intermediary services for the Bridge to Recovery Grant Program. PCG will assist with various functions during Round 2 as they did in Rounds 1 with the grant process, including accepting applications and verifying eligibility of the application, issuance of award letters, dispersing awarded funds via the reimbursement process, and managing and reporting. PCG will also provide technical assistance to applicants and grantees throughout the application submission process, grant award process, and reimbursement of invoices and payment process. So should you receive an email or a phone call from them, now you know who they are. Now I'd like to turn it over to Chantel Bush, and she's going to go ahead and discuss the items that are available and the history of the Bridge to Recovery grant program. Chantel?
Thank you, Roxanne. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantel Bush. I am the Health at Home Branch Chief, and I oversee CDA's Home and Community-Based Services programs. Next slide, Peter. I just want to thank you all today for joining us today as an expression of your interest in Round 2 of the Bridge to Recovery Grant. Next slide. For Round 2, there is approximately $35 million available to support eligible providers of adult day services, with making center improvements towards a healthier, person-centered environment for in-center congregate services for older adults and people with disabilities. Next slide. So this is a program overview of the funding. This funding is intended to support center providers with improvements towards a healthier and safer and infection and mitigation prevention measures. It's also intended to address staffing shortages by offering a wage differential and bonuses and the ability to hire temporary staff to ensure that there is a bolstered workforce in the center to aid with participant care. It will also aid to address access to in-center care. And we are really happy to announce that in Round 2, we are now allowing one vehicle purchase for eligible approved sites. I will turn it back over to Roxanne.
We wanted to point out some important dates for you guys to be aware of. The application did open on July 22nd. So if you haven't applied, it's currently open. Please review our website. We suggest doing that first so you can review all the helpful documents, permissible and impermissible items, including staff titles that are eligible and how to apply. Applicants can submit written questions between July 29th and August 12th. Again, today, the webinar is happening right now, and the deadline to submit written questions is August 12th. We will compile all questions and provide answers to the questions and post them on our website by August 22nd. And the deadline to submit your application is September 5th, 2024. Please mark this deadline in your calendar. We cannot accept applications after this date, and we cannot accept a paper application. So Brittany, towards the end of this presentation, will go over their Grants Connect system and how you can submit your application in their system, but no applications will be accepted after September 5th and no paper applications. We will be pleased to announce award notifications towards the end of October, and this is an anticipated date. The program funding ends March 31st, 2026, so all funds must be spent and your reimbursement and backup documentation must be submitted by this date. Funding parameters for this program, we do want to point out and stress that this is a reimbursement grant program, and grantees will receive reimbursement funds for their invoice once acceptable proof of payment and supporting documentation has been reviewed and approved. Grantees can only be reimbursed for eligible and allowable project costs that were approved in your grant agreement. Grantees need to submit the following documentation when requesting reimbursement, but not limited to this documentation. So you will submit an invoice request. This is a form that you will complete and fill out on Grants Connect, and then you will submit your supporting documentation that justifies your expense and proves that you have already paid for those expenses and you are requesting reimbursement. So items that you can submit for backup documentation are paid invoices, receipts, payroll reports or records, payroll check stubs, contracts, proof work has been completed and paid for. So this is not an allocation grant, it's a reimbursement grant. We will award you a certain amount, let's just say $100,000. And you have that to spend, but you will spend your own funds and then submit for reimbursement. So for example, if one of the items you requested and were approved for were bonuses, you would submit proof that you had paid that employee a bonus, and then we would reimburse you. So just wanted to make sure everybody understands what a reimbursement grant program is. Next slide. Grantees can submit invoice reimbursement requests on a monthly basis, and you should submit them monthly as your expenses are incurred so that you can get paid in a timely manner. If you did not incur expenses that month, you would not submit an invoice. CDA will reimburse valid and substantiated invoices that have been reviewed and approved within 45 days of receipt. And what does that mean? If you submit an invoice, but you have not provided the proper documentation, that 45 days does not start until we have received all the documentation that backs up your invoice and we have approved your invoice. And then you will receive payment within 45 days of the approval of your invoice. Final invoices and all supporting documentation must be submitted by March 31st, 2026. And failure to submit timely invoices could result in the loss of reimbursement payments. So it's really important to submit your invoices monthly as costs incurred. Do not wait 6 months and then submit for an invoice. And it's really important that you do not miss that March 31st deadline. Next slide. We are excited to announce that there is no monetary cap on your funding request. In round 1, we had a funding cap. But for round 2, you can request as much as you need based on the eligible items for this program. Applications will be scored and award amounts will be issued based on accuracy and completion. So please make sure you complete your application to the fullest, answer all the questions. Anything that's asterisked is a required question. Even if it's not applicable to your grant, please enter NA so we know that you did not miss that question. Make sure you're uploading all required documents because you will be scored on the accuracy and completion of your application. Also, the eligible and permissible items requested in your application, and they must support the goals of this grant. Also, the amount of funding CDA has available based on the number of applications received. Applicants will be contacted if their application has ineligible requests, and associated costs may need to be removed prior to the issuance of the award. There is no appeal process. However, we will provide you technical assistance and we will call you to discuss any errors or items that may need to be removed prior to our decision and issuance of our award. If the total of all application requests exceeds the amount of funding available for this program, CDA may need to implement a tiered funding prioritization process. Awards will be issued in the following order based on funding requests for these categories until funds are exhausted. We may or may not need to do this. We just don't know how many people are going to apply and if it's going to exceed that $35 million available funding. So if that should happen, we need to do the tiered funding award, and they will be based on these top 4 categories: salaries and wages, bonuses for staff recruitment and retention, and wage differentials and our staff training. Center improvements that increase health and safety for participants as it pertains to and provides infection prevention and mitigation as specified in the supplies and materials, equipment, and contractual categories. Modifications of usable space internally and or externally to promote the health and safety as it pertains to the spread of diseases as specified in the contractual category, and 1 vehicle purchase. These were the top 4 requested items when we did our survey. Eligible applicants, you can only apply for this grant. You must be one of these entities or you're not eligible. So Adult Day Healthcare Center, and they must be licensed by the California Department of Public Health and certified as a community-based adult services by the CDA. An adult day program licensed by the California Department of Social Services, and program of all-inclusive care for the elderly, PACE-site, eligible at the nursing home level of care by the Department of Healthcare Services. And we will be verifying that you are one of these entities when you submit your application. All interested applicants must complete and submit the application between July 22nd and September 5th. Again, there's that date. Please mark that in your calendar. And you must submit all applications through Grants Connect. You may begin your application and go back to it. You don't have to submit it at the second that you're starting it, because maybe you need to look up information or maybe you don't have the documents ready that need to be uploaded. But just make sure you do hit that submit button, because we had people from round 1 forget to hit the submit button and then their application wasn't eligible. So just be sure to do that. You must be licensed and in good standing in the state of California. And we're also pleased to announce that organizations that receive funding in round 1 are eligible to apply in round 2. However, if grantees received partial funding for a project they applied for, and they had to cover the remaining costs of that project with their own center's funding streams, they cannot be reimbursed for those costs in round 2.
Thank you, Roxanne. I'm going to go ahead and take it from here and give you an overview of the eligible activities. Our hope by now is that you have reviewed the request for application, or RFA, in its entirety at this time. It's been out for 2 weeks, but I wanted to cover some of the eligible activities. There are a total of 11 categories that are eligible for applicants to request funding for to make facility improvements and or to address staffing shortages. Applicants may apply for 1 or multiple eligible categories, all depending on whatever your centers and that particular location's needs are, and they may apply for 1 or multiple sites. Funding can be used to supplement an existing project, but keep in mind, you cannot request funding for reimbursement through round 2 of this grant for a project where the work has already been performed or where funds have already been expended for that particular project. Applicants cannot use this grant funding to supplant existing funds received from another source, such as Medicaid or Medi-Cal, or another grant. Next slide. When applying for multiple sites, you must submit a separate application for each eligible site that you're requesting funds. Each site must have its own license that is in good standing at the identified location on your application. You cannot transfer funding across various locations. So be very particular about what your particular center location's needs are for that particular site, because what you request for a specific site is only for that site. The exception to this is if you are requesting a vehicle that will be used by multiple sites. In that case, the vehicle that you request will only be included in one site application, but you must list all other site addresses in the application where the vehicle will be used. Next slide. So these here are the 11 permissible expense categories. Within the RFA, there is an array of detail outlined under each category specifying the requirements, whether that be the documentation that must be provided, whether that be with how you complete your application. So please provide very attentive detail to these permissible expense categories, because we would not like for you to miss the opportunity to get something that you really need not funded because the instructions were not followed or you did not provide and submit the required documentation at the time of completing and submitting your application. Next slide. Salaries and wages. So salaries and wages are really intended to address staff shortages. And keep in mind, it's for an eligible staff title. So CDA took the time in round one to create a staff titles list that is identified by center site. So be clear in looking at this list and referring to it based upon the site, the center type that you are, because it provides an array of the eligible staff titles. So funding for for salaries and wages, you can get request funding for a temporary employee to fill a key required vacant position. So it has to be a currently existing position. It's not something that you can forecast. It's going to be a position. You have to have it currently as a vacant position. You can also use funding to move a part-time employee to a full-time status. And in this case, we can go ahead and cover the difference of the part-time to the full-time with the grant funding. So as I mentioned again, it must be for an existing applicant, an existing vacancy, and a key required position on our eligible staff titles list. Next slide. I also want to mention that for a wage differential, the funding is intended to offer a retention opportunity to help you retain your staff by offering them a comparable wage via a wage differential increase. So the funding that you would request would only be the difference of the old wage and the new wage. So the grantee or applicant would be expected to pay the remaining of the wage. The funding would only cover what the increased difference is. Funding for a wage differential is only for a current employee who operates in an eligible staff title. Again, you cannot forecast an increase in your staff for either a wage differential or a temporary worker. When you do complete your application for a wage differential, you must provide the employee's name and their eligible staff title. I also wanted to indicate here that if you apply for a wage differential in round one, you are eligible to request a wage differential in round two, provided one, that the differential is for a different staff person, or two, if it is for someone you previously requested and were awarded funding for in round one, you cannot overlap the timelines of approval. So in essence, you would want to refer to your grant agreement, executed grant agreement, see what the dates are that you specified that funding period was for. As long as it does not overlap with funding in round two, then you're eligible to request it. If there is an overlap in the timelines, then unfortunately you cannot request a wage differential for that same individual in round two. I did also want to specify here that we will not accept or approve funding for any salaries or wages for a staff title that is not on our list of eligible staff titles. We will not accept a job description in lieu of you listing an eligible staff title from our list. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, before you move on, Peter, I'd like to really highlight something on wage differentials. Please really be attentive to this section in the request for application. We really provided some very strict parameters and requirements for requesting wage differential. In order for us to validate and verify that it is a comparable wage, you are required as an applicant to do some research and locate comparable jobs, comparable positions in the same geographical area that helps to support the amount you're requesting at the wage differential. These documents must be provided and submitted at the time of application. You are required to provide at least 3. And then within that, there is a maximum. You cannot exceed the wage differential increase of the highest of the 3 that you submit. So I really want to implore upon all of you to really thoroughly review the wage differential section in its entirety, again, in the request for application, to ensure that you're meeting the conditions in order to get that request reviewed and approved. Next slide. Bonuses. A one-time bonus of up to $1,000 maximum per eligible employee can be paid as either a recruitment bonus, which is for current staff, or I'm sorry, for hiring and filling a vacancy, and a retention bonus for incentivizing your current staff who is in an eligible staff title position. So upon completing your application, if you're going to request a recruitment bonus, you must enter TBD in the name field and then also list the eligible staff title list. So please also again refer to our eligible staff titles document. For a retention bonus, this is for current staff that you have. So you must list their name and their eligible staff title. So in the event that we do not have this information up front, we will not be able to award that request. And I want to keep in mind that if you are recruiting or requesting a recruitment bonus for a staff whereby you don't know the name at the time, once that person is hired into that position, it may trigger an amendment if you are granted that award. Next slide, please. Additionally, bonuses can be issued incrementally. So each eligible applicant can request a bonus for an individual staff up to $1,000. So you don't have to issue it all at once, but you can issue it incrementally. Again, you cannot forecast positions that do not currently exist in order to request a particular bonus. Only for existing positions, for current staff, or for a current vacant position. Next slide. Staff recruitment. Funding can be issued and awarded to applicants to post and advertise any of their vacant positions. And again, the posting must be for an eligible staff title position. We will not reimburse for any staff costs associated with staff recruitment. It's not going to be covered by the grant funding. Next slide. Travel is another category whereby you can request grant funding. The cost can include expenses for approved in-state or out-of-state center-related conferences and or training. And it's again for eligible staff title in one of our identified positions according to your center type. We will cover the cost for lodging, airfare, mileage, and meals. Next slide. The allowable cost of travel reimbursement cannot exceed that which is established by the California Department of Human Resources, otherwise known as CalHR. If the costs do exceed those guidelines, the grantee is going to be responsible to pay the difference. This is a state requirement and CDA cannot exceed those requirements. So there is another category for staff training where your conference and training fees must be requested under. Even though it's associated to the travel, you want to request funding for those fees in the staff training budget category. Next slide. Supplies and materials. You can request funding for supplies and materials. We did go ahead in the request for application, provide some very detailed examples of what permissible items are within each of these categories, and certain things are included in here, such as sanitation and infection control, such as hand sanitizer, soap, hand sanitizer dispensers, including airflow filtration, building ventilation, and also vehicle modification and preservation purchases. So please review that in its entirety to get an idea of the comprehensive things that you can request funding for with this grant. Next slide. Also, equipment may be requested within this grant funding as well. There are some parameters that are listed here, and we also want you to refer to the request for application for the comprehensive list. But some of those things do include items with a unit cost of more than $5,000, and it does include computing or memory storage devices. Next slide. Contractual. We really want to hone your attention to this category. For contractual work, that's anything that you have determined meets the goals of this grant, and it's going to require you to hire a company or a vendor to complete the work, such as providing updates or upgrades, replacing HVAC systems. There is a requirement that you must provide 2 bids at the time of application. If you're unable to provide those bids, you can provide 1 itemized bid and a written cost estimate. Please do not submit your application without uploading these documents. All instructions must be followed, and these must be submitted at the time of application. CDA will not do follow-up to obtain these documents after you have completed and submitted your application. We do want to implore upon you to refer thoroughly to the RFA for the comprehensive list of items that are able to be funded under the contractual category. Next slide. As previously mentioned, you will need 1 itemized bid and or written cost estimate for contractual work to be submitted with your application. 2 itemized bids must be submitted at the time of invoicing. If you are approved, that is a requirement to validate that what you are asking for is what you have been approved for. So your invoice must match the request in your application. So we want to make sure that you also recognize that there's an important component to this, to communicate when you're getting these bids with your potential contractor, to really specify and be clear about what your needs are. Also, we recognize that costs go up. So have the conversation with your potential contractor to ensure that you get the most realistic price, quote, and bid for the work, given the timing for which you intend to have the work completed as well. I want to also highlight here that for all building modifications, we will require for those who rent or lease the building, you must provide a copy of the lease and a written approval from the landlord. That is our justification and validation that you have obtained the proper approvals to make said requested modifications. If you own the building, you must provide a copy of the deed to show your proof of ownership. Please remember that these documents are required to be submitted at the time of application submission. We will not be doing follow-up to obtain them. So please make sure that you adhere to this so that your request can be fully reviewed and taken into high consideration. Just because there was an error that was on the part of following instructions, we would not want to see that occur. Next slide, please. Staff training, as I previously mentioned under conferences and training, that the costs associated with staff training, you can request this, and there has to be a very specific training that really addresses infection prevention and control. It's not just any training, so keep that in mind. They have to address infection prevention and control, infection mitigation, and or service care delivery to participants. So we want to make sure that you are clear in your request, so that you know exactly what you're eligible to request funding for. And we will be able to cover with this funding the cost of class and registration fees, as well as conference registration fees, training fees, and the cost of any materials and books. Next slide. This is the one we're very excited about. We recognize that transportation has really been a huge hit, and centers have taken a huge hit in the industry regarding transportation. So we're very fortunate in that we can offer the purchase of a vehicle exclusively for transporting participants to and from their residence and to and from the center. The requirements are that you are limited to one of the following purchases. You can request funding for one ADA compliant wheelchair accessible passenger transportation vehicle, one passenger vehicle that transports up to 8 passengers, including the driver. Vehicles must be purchased and not leased. Vehicles cannot be sold, traded, or rented and leased to another center or an entity. And it has to be for the sole purpose of transporting participants to and from. There are some very strict and clear parameters around what must be submitted at the time of application submission that provides for the cost of the vehicle. So please refer in entirety to the RFA application if this is an item that you foresee requesting funding for, to ensure that we can take that request into high consideration. Next slide. Fringe benefits are provided as a benefit to employers for their employees, and in addition to their regular salaries and wages. So this funding does include fringe benefit, which can include a multitude of leave types, employee insurance, workers' compensation, and pensions. I do want to point out here that fringe benefits can only be requested if you are requesting salaries and wages under this grant funding. So in other words, if you're not requesting a temporary worker or a wage differential of any sort, then you will not be able to request funding for fringe benefits. It's only an allowable expense when we are covering the salary or wages by the Bridge Recovery Grant Fund. Next slide, please. Indirect costs. Costs that are incurred for common or joint objectives that cannot be readily identified can be included in your grant funding request. Indirect costs generally include facility operations and maintenance costs, such as your rent, internet, and electricity, and administrative expenses. The indirect costs cannot exceed 10% of the total cost of your project approved in your budget summary and executed grant agreement. So obviously, when you do complete your application, you're going to have your total budget, and you're going to be able to request at least 10% of that in indirect cost. I do want to highlight that during the application review, if at any point in time we identify that you have requested funding for something that is impermissible, we will notify you, but that dollar amount will be deducted from your total award amount or the total budget amount. Thereby, it would also decrease your 10% in indirect cost. So I want you to keep in mind that there will be a removal of those funds across the board so that the indirect costs do not exceed 10% of the total cost of your approved project. Next slide, please. This here is an example of some of the permissible expenses. Applicants are able to use the funding to invest in needed infection prevention measures. And these are just a listing of some of the items that includes building ventilation, airflow and filtration, the ability to modify usable space, such as repurposing an outdoor area, just so that you can expand where maybe you provide services, and also where you can encourage more participant engagement. We can also utilize these expenses towards addressing sanitation and infection control, and again, vehicle modifications and our preservation. And again, the purchase of one vehicle. Next slide, please. Thanks, Roxanne. You're on mute, Roxanne.
Thank you. I knew I was going to do that. Here, Chantel went over some examples of permissible items, and we wanted to point out a few of impermissible expenses. So new construction to add on to an existing building. This would not be repurposing a current existing space. Bathroom remodel or kitchen remodel repairs. This is not eligible, although we will allow upgrades to bathroom fixtures, but not a complete remodel. Exercise equipment or installing sports courts does not meet the goals of the grant. We will not pay for monthly center fees, including monthly maintenance or monthly routine cleaning. However, we will pay for cleaning that specifically addresses infection mitigation. Landscaping or gardening is not allowable. Paving or redesigning the center parking lot. Purchase of appliances, purchase or cleaning windows and or blinds. Again, that's routine maintenance. Onboarding and screening costs for staff. Purchasing tablets, hotspots, cell phones, or any mobile device. Installing broadband or internet service, and tuition reimbursement. So these are just a few examples, but for a comprehensive list and more information on permissible and impermissible expenses, please refer to the RFA on the Bridge to Recovery webpage under helpful resources. Invoicing and reporting, as we discussed earlier, invoice reimbursement requests and proof of paid expenses should be submitted monthly. If you do not have any expenses for that month, then you will not need to submit an invoice. However, grantees must submit quarterly progress reports, which include a narrative or self-evaluation of the progress of the project. These reports will be submitted through Grants Connect, and they are due 45 days after the end of the previous quarter. Reports should include details on project activities and any required performance metrics. If your project has not begun or taken place, but your quarterly project is due, you will still need to submit it. And you would just state that our project, hasn't been started yet and the reason why. And then here's the reporting cycle and here's the due dates. Questions on the Bridge Recovery Grant Program must be submitted in writing by August 12th, 2024. Questions will not be answered individually. To submit questions via email, please submit it to this email address. And answers to written questions will be posted on the Bridge to Recovery Grant webpage by August 22nd. The questions and answers will be posted as an addendum to the request for application. And if we did not answer your question here today, all of these questions will be included in that addendum and posted on our website. Now I'd like to turn this portion of the webinar over to Brittany from Public Consulting Group, and she will be going through how to apply for this grant program through Grants Connect. Brittany?
Thanks, Roxanne. I do want to note that somebody does have their hand up. So I don't know if they have a question that you want to answer now or if we want to wait.
Let's wait so we can make sure that you get through your portion.
Okay.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Yep. So there isn't a name. It just says MS that I can see. So we'll get to you as soon as I'm done, and I will try to make sure I'm thorough, but also give you all time to ask questions. So applying through Grants Connect, if you applied in round one and you've been using Grants Connect, should be somewhat familiar, although I'm excited to announce that CDA took a lot of the feedback that you all heard, and as they, made improvements for the round two in general, that included some improvements, we think, to the application process. So hopefully it's even easier for all of you to navigate. But just some reminders that Chantel and Roxanne have said. The application did open July 22nd, and it closes at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time on September 5th. Please make sure you hit that submit button. As Roxanne said, you can start a draft application. We see lots of them in draft right now, but you must hit your submit by that time period. Again, this is all through Grants Connect. Please do not use the old application links you have from round one. That will not work. That will not let your application get submitted. Please make sure you use the current link that's on the CDA website. I believe it's in the RFA. Peter can post it in the chat. Use the current link. Do not use anything older. It's not going to work for you. If you haven't used Grants Connect yet and you're new, you can sign up for Grants Connect. This is screenshots here. In this webinar, these slide decks will be posted to CDA's website along with the recording, so you'll also be able to refer back to this. But you'll sign up through Grants Connect. You can use the same login credentials you used in round one if you used round one. But if not, you'll just you'll start by clicking sign up, which is right up here with the red and the arrow. After you sign up from your account, you'll receive a confirmation email and activation link from Your Cause LLC that's welcoming you to Grants Connect. Please make sure you pay attention for that email address and name specifically. It's not coming from CDA. It's not coming from PCG. That link for the registration confirmation expires within or after 1 hour. If you don't see the email, please make sure you check your spam folder as well. We do know that sometimes they go there. That's what I just said. But if you didn't get the email and it's not in your spam, you can also click resend account verification email down here highlighted in red, and it should resend. So just again, make sure that if you're signing up for the first time, that you don't just click sign up and walk away, because you do need to activate that link within an hour or get it reset. You could also get specific Grants Connect support by accessing at the bottom of the sign-in page in this red box here. There's a help center, there's email, there's live chat. Those are all ways, and a question mark as well, that can support you in getting specific Grants Connect help. They will not be able to answer questions or support you with round 2 specific questions, but system questions they can support, or system issues. To start a new application, very similar to round 1, once you have your account set up or you've accessed your account through the round 2 link, you will click start a new application. Return to the link on this slide or on the grants webpage each time you start an application for a new site. Don't use your browser or anything like that, because it could take you to the same application. So if you have multiple centers you're applying for, use the link on your screen or on the Grants CDA webpage each time you want to start a new application. A little bit about what's in the application. Some of the general applicant questions that you saw in round 1 if you applied. Basic information about your organization, what your mission statement is, the current programs you're operating, the average number of participants. Also then a general overview of your project. So what needs is your project addressing, or projects? What are the key milestones and deliverables for your projects? Who are the key personnel involved? What is your sustainability plan once grant funds are expended? How will you continue, or what else will you be doing? What's your timeline? You'll have to provide your project activities and deliverables as well. So the application sections, if you've been in Grants Connect, this is built like many of the other forms, various tabs at the top, but the sections for the budget requests are specific and align with what Chantel and Roxanne covered in terms of the budget categories. You can see all the budget categories here, and then the related sections of the application will appear based on which categories you select. You'll be asked initially to say, what categories are you applying for funding? And then you will see those sections appear in the application. If you don't ask for supplies and materials, that will not be a tab that you have to complete, for example. When you're completing your budget request, please make sure that you list deliverables for each budget category you selected from that drop-down menu. So this is set up differently from round 1. If you looked at round 1, the deliverables are going to be specific to your budget categories and align a little more closely. So for each of those deliverables for that budget category, you provide a description of that deliverable, the start and end dates for that deliverable, and the associated expenses with that deliverable. For salaries, wages, bonuses, and fringe benefits, you may need to fill out an additional Excel file. We know that often our experience with round 1 is that you had more than 10 staff that you wanted bonuses or salaries and wages or fringe benefits for. So you can list 10 staff members within Grants Connect, and then the additional staff members should be added to the Excel file that's attached to the application. It's one that's already been created in collaboration with CDA that you'll be able to access via a link and attached in your application. It's a template to use and has all the required fields that CDA will need to make decisions about a funding and approval of projects. Your budget summary will also, at the end of your application, it will be a tab that populates based off of each of the budget categories you're applying for funding for and the totals within those categories. Please review this to make sure all final calculations are accurate with your request and what you are wanting to submit before you actually click submit. Again, this will auto-populate based off of your data entry in the budget categories, but please make sure and review that it's meeting the request that you were expecting to meet. If there's an issue, you can reach out to our technical assistance team after you've reviewed and everything looks right. We can support you with that. There's an attachment section as well as part of the application process. The attachments will be where you upload any required or supplemental documents to bolster your application. Chantel and Roxanne spoke throughout talking about round two, the areas where supporting documentation is needed, any contractual work, that bid or itemized estimate, two bids by the in order to be approved for funding, your lease or deed, et cetera, anything else, the comparable salaries. This will all be added into the attachment section that you can upload. There's also a list of all documents submitted and the reason for including them so that CDA and the teams are aware of what was submitted and why. Similar to round one, you'll have the attestation, so the conditions that you're required to follow if you are awarded a grant, and you must agree to all of them in order to submit your application. Saving an application. The application does auto-save while you're in progress and working on it. If you leave, the auto-saved information will display when you return. So whatever was the most updated before you walked away or closed out of the browser will be there when you log back in. Navigating the application, again, you can see that there are sections or tabs across the top line here. That's the navigation bar. Depending on how large your monitor screen is, you might see more than 3, you might see less than 3, but the more arrow in the button here is where you can access the rest of the tabs of the application. You can download your application as well. You can download to use offline before you submit it if you wanted to do a written version to kind of calculate everything and figure it out before working in Grants Connect. However, as stated by Chantel and Roxanne, paper applications will not be allowed for submission. So even if you download it and fill it out that way, you then will have to transfer and data enter that information into Grants Connect and submit it through Grants Connect itself. Question types that you'll see within the application, there's fill in the blank, multiple choice, drop downs, short answers, table entry, multiple ways in which data and information can be submitted. And then the next slides will discuss the interfaces for short answer and table entry questions. There we go. So a short answer question. One of them is describe your organization. There's the rest of the question. This text box right here is where you'll submit information about your organization. You get a current word count. These two lines where this Windows control arrow, you can click on those lines and drag the window down if your text gets too much so that you can see it all in one. There is a maximum word count of 250 words. So all of those features are available here. In your budget tables, you add rows to the table. So we often will say, how much or how many of something do you need? It'll be a drop down. You'll select, and in this example, it's 2, and that'll populate 2 lines of data that you need to enter. So your supply 1, your supply 2, and the associated information with each of those items. If you needed 5 items, you would go up to the drop down here and select 5, and then you'd see 5 rows of data. All of the data that you're putting here for your funds requested, that value will auto-populate in this gray box at the bottom of your budget screen with the supplies total based off your funds requested total. So you can see for supply 1, it was $100. Supply item 2 was $300. Total funds is $400. These gray boxes, I know I've said it in a little bit, but you can't, there's nothing you can do with these boxes. Any gray box auto-populates from some other field within the application. So they are not anything that you can edit in this gray box. Application submission, describe the communications plan, or just again, rough question here, but you'll sign and submit. When you finish, click the sign and submit button at the corner of the attestation section. Once you click submit, you'll be taken to a screen to type, upload, or draw your signature. So there's various ways you can do your signature here, type your name, you can enter the style, it can do that. I think people have experienced this in other kinds of online signature systems. Once you do that, you'll click sign and submit to submit your application. You will receive a confirmation email if your submission was successful. If you don't receive that confirmation email, it most likely your application wasn't officially submitted, so you'll want to go back into your system and check. But our team is always available to provide technical assistance if needed. error messages. If you have errors, you'll see a red exclamation on the tab, and it'll give you a list of the errors and what is needed. All of those errors must be corrected before you can submit your application. You can view your applications. Once you've submitted applications, you can log into your account and you'll see My Application. From there, you can edit any that are unsubmitted, check your status, complete any requested revisions if they're asked for, see your application IDs if you need that. But you can access all of that through My Applications and the application ID. Checking the status. A quick view of your application status is shown in My Application, so you can see that you have we have a draft saved from May 16th. Statuses include draft, that it's saved but not submitted, awaiting review, it's been submitted but not yet reviewed, in progress means the review process is in progress, on hold means there's a requested revision, approved means it's been approved, and declined means it's been denied. Now that doesn't leave much time for questions, but we've got a few minutes, so I think Peter's been managing a lot of questions in the chat, but I'll turn it over to Peter to help navigate these pieces.
Thank you, Brittany. Hello, everybody. As Brittany said, I'm Peter, so I'll help sort of manage the chat right now. Before we get started, just a couple of things to note. We've seen a lot of questions of things that are, one, covered in the RFA, or two, are very, very specific to your individual project. So regarding the first one, please do look through the RFA. As we said, we couldn't fit the full list of eligible supplies, materials, equipment, contracts on these slides. It's just too long. Slides are too small. So please do read through that RFA before you reach out to us to see if what you're asking about is already covered. Regarding the latter, sort of very specific questions about your project, again, we're limited on time. We can't get into that right now. So if you do have such a specific question, please do reach out to the helpline. I will make sure I post the email address in the chat, but you've seen it throughout the presentation. So please do send those questions there. So as Brittany said earlier, we do have one person raising their hand. So we will just start there. And Amanda, I think that's you. So you now have the option to unmute. If you'd like to go ahead and ask your question, we'll be happy to answer it. Amanda, again, requesting, if you're having trouble unmuting.
I had to find the unmute button.
Yep,
I got it.
go for it.
Just a couple really quick questions, and I will speak quickly because I know we're on time crunch. Is for the staff and replacement recruitment bonuses, you said that it's only for staff positions that are open. So this is a time and point part of the grant, because I can have open positions now or when I submit the grant by whatever, September early. But by the time it comes through, I may have more. And I actually, since we're a growing center, I do expect to have more open positions by the time the grant is actually approved. And then on top of that, at the time that we actually get reimbursement for it. That would be the first quick question. And the second one is, you're asking again for names of the staff people who are going to get wage differentials. I'm going to really request strongly that you take a look at this again and look at a positions, because I'm sure what you found, as well as what we found as going forward, is that we had lots of staff who we changed staff by the time we actually were receiving the money, by the time, not receiving the money because we haven't received any money yet, but we had different names from the time we initially applied, the time we had to apply a second time, or confirm the grant, the time we invoiced, and now the time that we're going through that. So I'm just going to and you may not be able to do that, but that we don't have a name associated with it, because I'm looking at multiple changes in my staff and looking at losing the wage differentials that we were potentially, losing it. So I don't know if that's already been addressed, but those are my two quick questions.
Amanda, so we
Roxanne.
will take that into consideration. It does become quite difficult at invoicing if we're getting multiple changes in names. That's one of our concerns, but we will definitely take that into consideration, and we appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
Okay, and then the first question regarding the replacement recruitment bonuses, being only at the point in time, is there any way to say, when we expect this to happen, that we'll have, as we're growing, what we'll expect? Or do we just ask for at the point in time, knowing that it's going to be 9 months later that it potentially is approved, or 6 months later that it's approved, these positions may have already been filled. How are we accounting for that?
So grants are based on current expenses. They cannot be based on future expenses for anything. So if you're saying that because of growth to your center, you may be adding employee positions, and you want to be able to fund those, that is not eligible, because that's based on future growth, not an expense right now.
So it's
Chantal,
point
did
in,
you want
so as
to-
of September 5th, what are my missing positions? Despite the fact that we'll probably not get approved till, I don't know, 6 months later, correct? And then get financed for it 6 months after that. And I'm
Right,
not meaning to be
so-
sarcastic, so I'm
No, you're
sorry.
not.
It just,
Yeah, I don't take that at all.
okay, good.
Yeah, yeah. Chantal, do you have anything different to add there?
No, I just wanted to clarify that you have the option to choose a recruitment bonus for a vacant position or retention bonus. So if I'm understanding you, Amanda, you're saying by the time you apply, let's say it's a recruitment, the position is
Gotcha.
vacant.
That makes sense.
And
I hear
then
you.
by the time you're ready to invoice, it's
Yep.
filled, correct?
Yes, you totally just answered my question, Chantal.
Okay, okay.
Thanks. You got it. I got
Thank you.
it. Thanks.
Thank you, Chantel. In the interest of time, we'll move through some questions in the Q&A now. And obviously, we're not going to get to them all, right? We have many, many questions. So I will say as well, if your questions do not get answered, we will post answers eventually to the Bridge to Recovery website. As we said, we're compiling everything for additional guidance documents. So if you don't get your answer now, first thing, check the RFA, see if the answer is there. But if not, we will make sure to post them to the website as well. So a couple rapid fire questions about vehicle purchases. So we'll just sort of move through those quickly. For vehicles, do they need to purchase a vehicle in full first, or will upfront funding be available? So we went over funding. This is a reimbursement-based grant. So there is not upfront funding, but I think the second half of the question, Chantel, you're unmuted, so I'll kick it to you. Do they need to pay the cost of the car all at once? Or let's say hypothetically installments are available, could they do it piecemeal?
Our requirement is that the vehicle be paid in full.
Okay,
That's specified in the application, the RFA.
thank you. Related question, do they need to buy from a dealership or could they buy from a private owner?
There's no parameters around that. We just recommend that you adhere to the guidelines and the request for application of submitting the cost to us when you are requesting reimbursement. Again, keep in mind the time frame that it cannot be purchased prior to you being awarded any funding.
Thank you. And then if they just recently leased a vehicle, could they change that to a purchase and use grant funds for that?
No, they cannot. That was done prior to this RFA being awarded. And
Thank you. And
applicants
then
getting into
last question related to purchasing. I think I know the answer to this one, but I wanted to make sure y'all hear me say it so I don't give any incorrect information. Somebody's asking if they wanted to purchase an electric vehicle, if the CDA will reimburse them for the cost of a charging station and security. I imagine the answer there is no. They will only cover the cost of the vehicle itself. But again, I wanted y'all to hear me say that.
Peter, you're correct.
Excellent. Okay. And let me say too, I just want to thank, I know Jennifer's been going through the chat from CDA and answering a whole bunch of questions. So thank you there. If you did post a question in the chat, please do check to see if she has answered your question there as well. So Roxanne and Chantal, I know we're presently over the scheduled time of the webinar. So I just wanted to see sort of how you wanted to handle things at this point.
Peter, thank you. And also Jennifer for manning the chat at this time. We just want to remind everybody of some deadlines, but first and foremost, wanted to thank you all for your interest. We do want you to refer to our webpage for updates and please review the RFA. Many of these questions that you are asking in the chat are concretely answered within the RFA. Just some few quick reminders and hopefully we can put these in the chat, and if not, I can do this. We have a deadline to submit written questions is this coming Monday, August 12th, 2024. Answers will be posted on the grant's webpage on Thursday, August 22nd. And then the deadline for applications is Thursday, September 5th, 2024. So please adhere to these guidelines and these deadlines. And we are happy to address questions. We will go ahead and respond to those as an addendum to the request for application by the required deadline. Again, thank you all for coming and for your interest in round 2 of the Bridge Recovery Grant Program.